All right, perfect. Should we get started? All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Samantha Smith with the Salt Lake City Arts Council, where our mission is to promote, present, and support artists and arts organizations in order to facilitate the development of the arts and expand awareness, access, and engagement. We're thrilled to host the Halophyte Collective's Myth and Memory exhibition at the Finch Gallery, in addition to Mark LaPointe's Impossible Spaces. Both exhibitions are available to view virtually and in person until Friday, September 18th. You can schedule an appointment by going to saltlakearts.org/program/current exhibitions. And there you can also purchase pieces of the artwork. You can also stay up to date with all of the Salt Lake Arts Council news by following us on social media at SLC Arts Council. And tonight, we're airing this panel discussion on both the Arts Council and the Halophyte Collective's Facebook pages. So if you have any questions for the group, just enter your questions in the comments area and we'll get those questions over to Andrew. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our moderator for this evening, Andrew Shaw. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the panel discussion about the Halophyte Collective's Myth and Memory exhibition. Like Sam said, I'm Andrew Shaw. I'm one of the coordinators and curators of the show and moderator of tonight's conversation. Before we begin, I've prepared a few remarks, and my apologies for reading them, but I wanted to stay focused so we can spend the majority of the hour talking with our panelists. First, a little about the Halophyte Collective. The Halophyte Collective is a group of artists and writers in Salt Lake City, which started as a critique circle and sounding board for creative projects and a supportive community of artists and friends. The group collaborates on publications, artist books, exhibitions, and workshops. Our work has included 4 issues of the Halophyte publication, 3 group exhibitions, 2 artist books, one we refer to as the Sun Tunnels book, and a forthcoming collection of field guides. First, even though we are gathering virtually, I would like to acknowledge that those of us in this conversation are gathering on the unceded lands of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute peoples. I ask that you join me in acknowledging these indigenous nations and communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. I also acknowledge that our contemporary art community has been founded upon exclusions and erasures of many indigenous peoples. I intend for this acknowledgement to demonstrate a commitment to working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. And I'd like to thank landacknowledgements.org for their guidance in drafting that statement. I also would like to thank the Salt Lake City Arts Council for hosting the Myth and Memory exhibition and tonight's panel discussion, and recognize Samantha Smith from the Salt Lake City Arts Council and Claire Taylor from the Halophyte Collective as the people behind the curtain who helped make this evening's event possible. The topic of our exhibition, Myth and Memory, arose from a conversation amongst members of the Halophyte Collective. We were talking about family stories that have been passed down from generation to generation. Stories about sister wives and grave robbers that over time had become family mythologies all their own. We thought this topic of family mythologies and collective foggy memories would make for a good group exhibition. Before sending the call, we intentionally made the idea broader to cast a wider net, encompassing all types of mythologies of everyday experiences. Storytelling, archetypes appearing in the everyday, oral histories, rituals and religions, reinterpretations and modernizations of ancient myth, and the truths that persist through fictions. My co-curator, Emmeline Twitchell, and I closed the call for entries on March 1st and quickly made our selections within a week, and that all feels like a different era now. Since selecting the pieces that now hang in Finch Lane, our community has been disrupted by our efforts to fend off the COVID-19 pandemic, rattled by a 5.7 magnitude earthquake and its aftershocks, and awakened by the racial justice uprising following the unjust killings of Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color at the hands of police forces around the country, including Bernardo Palacios Carvajal here in Salt Lake City. 2020 has shaken our mythologies. The great American narratives honed over generations to shape our common values are being tested. The archetype of the peace officer as servant and protector is being exposed as fraudulent. And the historical gap created through the erasure and abandonment of experiences by Black, Indigenous, Latinx, female, transgender, gender nonconforming, and other marginalized communities is receiving long overdue scrutiny. The communities that have long been victims of the failings of capitalism, government, and the criminal justice system have seen it for a very long time. And those of us in positions of privilege are coming to a better realization of the depth and deception of our everyday mythologies. I acknowledge that the pieces in Myth and Memory, although all created in a post 9/11 world and in the shadow of the current presidential administration, and selected only a few months ago, may underrepresent the narratives and pressing examinations of our present time. But all art, including these works, is given new life and meanings when our lens shifts, and I'm excited to speak with our panelists today about their recent experiences with the exhibition. Hikmet Sidney Lowe is a Salt Lake City-based art historian, writer, curator, and speaker. Her work examines the changeable nature of the earth and addresses our perceptual and cultural constructs of the land. Her award-winning book, 2017's The Spiral Jetty in Cyclo, Exploring Robert Smithson's Earthwork Through Time and Place, is the first in a series devoted to singular works of land art. Current writing projects include the Sun Tunnels in Cyclo, book manuscript, and a book chapter that finds common ground between land art and the architecture of Southern Nevada. She teaches art history at Westminster College for the Honors College and the School of Arts and Sciences. In her spare time, Hikmet photographs the Great Salt Lake, and her photographs have been exhibited internationally. Nancy Rivera is a Mexican-American visual artist and arts administrator. Through her photography-based work, she addresses notions of authenticity, translation, and appropriation. Her most recent work reflects on her experience as a first-generation Mexican-American. She has exhibited nationally in a variety of traditional and non-traditional venues, and her work is part of private and public collections. She currently manages the Visual Arts program at the Utah Division of Arts and Museums and is the vice chair of the Salt Lake Art Design Board. Jorge Rojas is a multidisciplinary artist, independent curator, and educator from Morelos, Mexico. He studied art at the University of Utah and at Bellas Artes in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. Rojas makes performance that examines cultural, social, and mediated forms of communication. He uses performance to bring people together, as well as provoke public participation, action, and collaboration. Rojas's interests include spiritual histories, interpretations of ancient rites and customs, institutional critique, and responding to abuses of power. In recent years, his performance work has focused almost entirely on drawing attention to and denouncing political injustice and racial tensions in the US. Rojas's work and curatorial projects have been exhibited nationally and internationally in venues including Queens Museum of Art, Museo del Barrio and White Box in New York City, New World Museum and Project Row Houses in Houston, Ex Convento del Carmen in Guadalajara, FOFA Gallery at Concordia University in Montreal, and the Utah Museum of Fine Arts and the Utah Museum of Contemporary Art here in Salt Lake City. Since 2015, Rojas is Director of Learning and Engagement at the Utah Museum of Fine Arts, where he oversees education, community engagement, and programming. Rojas is a passionate advocate for advancing racial and cultural justices through the art. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here. You can unmute your microphones and we'll be ready to chat. I wanted to start just for each one of you to tell us about a piece that you thought from the show really embodied the themes of the exhibition that we're working with. And I'd like to start with Nancy.
Sure. There were so many standout pieces in the show, and everybody had such a unique way of interpreting the theme, which I found especially interesting. But one of the pieces that I gravitated toward more than any others was Mary Toscano's Blank Slate. And I think part of it was I watched her process on Instagram, where I saw the stitches that she was creating, and the whole time wondering, where is this going? What is this project? And to see it completed and this very lovely piece that to me speaks of women's work, that's immediately what I thought of. And it also made me think of my own family's, the matriarchs of my family who for whom needlework is huge and is such a part of our traditions and the way that we connect with one another. And it was very nostalgic for me to see this piece and appreciate the labor that went into it. And to Mary's very, very lovely, very concise statement that was, I believe, unseen labor, and thinking about, the work that personally the people in my family, create these artworks that traditionally haven't been thought of as fine art, but there's definitely something there.
Awesome, thank you so much. Hikmet, can you tell us about a piece that you thought was particularly embodied the themes of the Myth and Memory show?
Sure, and thank you for having us. This is a pretty awesome opportunity. I really appreciated being able to see the exhibit in real life. And as I was going through and sort of, as I do, circling and then circling again, the work that really stood out for me was Josh Graham's I Want to See My Mountains After Beuys, which is that reference to the great German artist Joseph Beuys. And I, at first, was wondering why I was that compelled to be drawn to this specific work. And once I read the, the statement that he had said, and particularly this part of it, this artwork extends a conversation started by the artist Joseph Beuys by acknowledging the impact of the mountain myth in my own life and recognizing in it the potential for understanding inexplicable psychological positions. And I thought, oh, this is what I'm seeing through the exhibit. And once I realized, and maybe my lens is continually drawn into landscape, I started thinking, and I circled through the exhibition, and I found landscapes everywhere. And I was really fascinated with that idea of myth and memory and landscape. I was drawn to, in the research that I've done related to cultural studies in landscapes, the art historian Simon Schama has written a book called Landscape and Memory, where he talks a lot about these ideas about memory, about individual, nationalistic, and what that means related to landscape. And I started to see all of these works then as that basic primal imprint of where we start to create our myths, where we form our memories. And it's interesting, do you want me to wait to tell you about the piece that had me then think about the show in a new, different way?
Well, yeah, let's hear from from Jorge and see
Perfect.
what piece kind of like seemed to like really capture the major themes, and then we'll start getting into all the other
Great
crosstalk. Thank you.
Yeah, so both of those pieces that both of you fellow panelists mentioned are pieces that I was also drawn to. So I'm glad I have some backups. No, and also thank you for inviting me to participate in this conversation, and for the invitation to go to Finch Lane Gallery and experience the exhibition all by my lonesome, which felt very special. And I just want to say, I think it's a really interesting show. So congratulations to you, Andrew, and the Halophyte Collective. One of the pieces that I thought that really embodied the exhibition well was kind of what I thought was a standout piece in the show, and it's by the artist Stephanie Dykes. Mm-hmm. She, I believe the name of the work is Double Mudhead, Restocking the Star Pools with Cosmic Koi and Dancing Eagle. I hope I got the title right. And at first, as a person of color and as an artist as well, and like Nancy, also very interested in like the topics of appropriation and what that means in this day and age. And at first I was kind of like, who did this work? Who's doing work about Hopi Indians? And and so then I realized it was Stephanie whose work I've admired for a long time. and who does just absolute gorgeous work. And it just, I started reading the label that she wrote about it, and it basically talks about how one day her father has like what she calls a guest bedroom in their basement that's filled with like collected miscellaneous objects, including these two Kachina dolls, a dancing eagle and a double mud head. And she talks about how one night when she was sleeping over at her father's house, in the middle of the night, she was woken up by the Kachina dolls talking. And she remembers saying, "Be quiet, I'm trying to sleep." And then she mentions about how the Kachina dolls were so excited to just be talking to someone. And so I just thought, first of all, what a lovely story, and what a beautiful experience to have. I mean, these are the types of, I think that, spiritual experiences that we can have as like, ordinary humans, but that are hard to sort of like capture or retell or even get anyone to believe us for that matter. But I think they're not that uncommon. And whether it was a dream that she had or whether it was real doesn't really matter. What matters is that she recalls this story, it moved her, and she had a very, I think, spiritual connection with these Kachina dolls, right? And so I think, it led me to sort of do a little research and like, what do Kachina dolls do? And so I'll read just a little bit. It says, by Hopi people, it says, they are carved typically from cottonwood root by Hopi people to instruct young girls and new brides about Katsinas or Katsinam, the immortal beings that bring rain and control other aspects of the natural world and society. It's a very short description, but anyway, so there's, these connections that we have with the supernatural world, or the world that we don't know how to define or don't know how to like prove scientifically. But I think that, it's when we have the ability to connect with other cultures and with other beings, as artists and also just as human beings, right? And so I just think that when I think about myth and memory and the theme of the show, this one just kind of like hit it right on the head.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jorge, for sharing that. And I feel like you bringing that new context to it also helps kind of move us into that next topic of, was there something from this exhibition, or were there any works in this exhibition that made you kind of shifted your thoughts about the theme of myth and memory and storytelling? And Hikmet, you were already moving in that direction. Let's hear what you have on the tip of your tongue.
Once I started seeing the landscapes, and there are many in the show, either overt or covert, and some really amazing examples of this. But once I started thinking about this idea of landscape and sort of imprinted in our psyche and how we move through the world, sort of having that dialogue with myself, I started like thinking about imagined created landscapes. Are they myth? Are they reflections of culture? Are they landscapes of our mind? And so the piece then that made me think about this in a new way was Mary Toscano's Blank Slate. Because of the way that the fabric lays, because of the undulations, the modulations, that sort of singular color, it could be snow, it could be the absence of color, and that absence sometimes then means that we can superimpose, if we want to, something else onto that. Basically, I saw this work as this receptacle then for us to overlay our own myths and our own memory of land and landscape onto something that is so amazingly beautifully crafted. So that's where I went with that, from something that was on the wall to something that was sort of, this vertical to this horizontal to this receptacle.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I feel like I should say that Mary's my wife. And so I spent a lot of time sitting alongside her as she created this piece, and talking with her as she created the piece, and just seeing how how it changed over time, and even in the installation of it, you know, up to the day of the installation, trying to think of, well, how are we going to install this? Is it going to drape over something just flat? Is it going to be on the wall? Is it going to hang like Stephanie's kites hang? And
I think it's perfect the way that it is. Again, because it is imperfect. If it were hanging on the wall, you would just have that sheet, that sort of semblance, right? That idea of a panel or a painting, and the way that it has been formed is really lovely. So that's where I went then, and I felt like it was sort of the epitome work, without being a landscape whatsoever.
yeah, that's great. Nancy, was there a piece that stood out to you that really made you kind of challenge your ideas of myth?
Yeah, it was interesting. I think having seen the exhibition and thinking about myth memory, it really recalled for me a couple of books that I acquired a few years ago. And these books are anthologies that look at classical fairy tales and myths from around the world, but they are retold and rewritten by contemporary fiction writers. And when I was looking at Claire Taylor's pieces and reading her statement, there was a connection there for me. And what that was is thinking about the way that Claire talks about personal mythology. Mm-hmm. And in terms of, you know, we are experiencing turbulent times. There's a pandemic, we experienced an earthquake. And she talks about how these events and these experiences that now we have to revisit and re-examine our past personas, and in a way start to reshape our own history and our own stories and the way that, you know, we want to represent ourselves moving forward. And I think it relates to the way that Claire in her work, she shares her experience with the land and often revisits these places, and it's often retelling the story of those experiences. So those two really made a connection for me that I found really, really fascinating, and it made me want to go back to these stories and think about how, you know, literature and art really come together. And I think especially through Claire's work, she has a way of creating narratives and stories that though they are very personal to her experience, a lot of these places that she creates in her artworks are places that we're familiar with, and it becomes this interesting dynamic and experience to see them and think about them, both in the way that she experiences and the way that we do.
I really love that, and I also love that you both have brought in this. I've seen this through line of land in the works there, which. When Emmeline and I were first going through and thinking about how to lay out the show, I mean, this was back in March, we were like, okay, where would we place things, making sure that we had a good, just the right density of work in the show. We started trying to look for sub-themes, and land didn't even come to our mind. So I love that you both have seen that. It's like, oh yeah, it's right there. It's right there. But I think that's one of my favorite things. Actually, before I move on to this, because I just want to remind everybody who's watching that if you do have questions that you want to share with us, Claire Taylor, who made that piece, is she's in the wings and she's collecting some questions. And so if we have time near the end of this, we will share some audience questions. So feel free to type questions into the Facebook chat and we'll pull some of those up. But one of my favorite parts of seeing a group exhibition is seeing works next to each other that weren't intended by the artist to be next to each other, and the conversations that take place with those works. And I feel like that's how I end up spending most of the time when I'm in a show like that. It's like, oh, this is doing this and that's doing that. Jorge, I was wondering if, did you see any works that you felt like were creating a conversation that was interesting for you?
Let me unmute myself. Well, let's see. Let me actually, do you mind if I respond to the earlier question?
Absolutely, yes.
Um,
Let me tell you, I have no experience in doing these Zoom calls, and so you feel free to take this in any direction that you want it to go.
well, Andrea, you're a natural, first of all. But so, yeah, I wanted to, because I was thinking about that last question, and I was thinking in my mind about this particular artwork that I just had not considered it would be in the show at all until I saw it in this group, and so I just wanted to talk a little bit about it. But before I do, I just wanted to also just jump on board and talk a little bit about Mary's piece and just say how, you know, she talks about how in her label it says an examination of invisible unnamed labor. And I just think that that's so poignant right now and so important for us to think about all the unnamed labor and all the people that are doing all the labor so that we can be safe in our homes, those of us that get to work from home. And of course, there's a lot of people that don't have that privilege. And so I just, that piece made me think about that. And I also know Mary's work from before. I didn't know that she stitched, but it was just incredible to see that the same sort of like sicko obsessive eye and hand that she puts into all of her work, she also puts into this stitching and needlework, and I was just blown away by that too. But anyway, the piece that I want to draw your attention to is a piece by the artist Michelle McFarlane, who's a photographer, and so what Michelle did is she juxtaposed, I think, 9 different black and white photographs of an interior of a home. And I tend to, you know, be drawn to sort of like minimal and also, I don't know, like limited palettes and, you know, things like that. So I was, you know, immediately drawn to it. And then there was a poem that would accompany the piece. I'm assuming is by the artist, but if you don't mind, I'll just read it real quick. It's brief. It says, well, first of all, the title of the piece is, "This is the house that was the home they moved from." And then the poem reads, "A family lived here, a mother, father, daughter, son, and dog. All grew and then moved on. The children, in the order they arrived, daughter, son. And when the mother and the father and the dog were left, they too moved on, one at a time. This is the house that was the home they moved from." And so your earlier question was about like, what surprised you? What works in the show surprised you that made you think differently about myth, right? Or about memory. And so it wasn't until after I had left the show and I went home, I think it was the next day actually, when I just remembered that piece. And it has to do because I was reminded of it because I was thinking of family and health issues and growing old. And also as an immigrant, I've been going back and forth between Mexico and the US all my life. And so I've lived in multiple homes. And so I always felt like there was, you know, there's these memories that happen in these homes, and then you leave. And then you go to a different home, and then you go to a different home. And now, you know, I have 4 siblings, and as we all retell our stories, whether it's like the things that we like remember hating about growing up, or the thing that our mom did to piss us off, or the thing, you know, whatever it was, we always remember it differently. And I'm like, seriously, that's your memory of it? And it's like, yeah, that's totally what happened. And so I started thinking about the depth of home as a place for mythological experiences on the most sort of common human level, and also as this place where memories happen and also reside. So I think I think those images are like ghostly that way, and really made me think differently about the power of you know, the places where we live, our houses, our homes, our apartments, or not homes, but places where we reside, that where we develop our own personal myths.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Jorge. You know, since we are in this particular time, and Jorge already touched on seeing the show in a more private setting, And that's how a lot of people, I think, are going to be experiencing this exhibition, are either by signing up from the Arts Council's website. They can you can schedule to see it by yourself, or up to 5 people from the same household unit can come and see it. But it's going to be a much more intimate experience than going to, you know, the public reception that we thought we were going to be having. I was wondering if any of you or all of you would like to talk about what that experience was, and how that experience and being kind of in this time of distancing influenced your viewing of the show. And I'm just going to let you jump for it.
I was so happy to be able to see an art exhibit. I had, no, I'm serious. I had been to Modern West maybe a week or two before that, and it was the first time I'd been into an institution to see art since February. And I had 2 different experiences. I loved the experience of Salt Lake City Arts Council because that ability to be able to go in, and I went by myself. I could have taken 4 of my best friends along with me, but I didn't do that. I just really wanted to see the show and focus on it. Was a luxury. It was incredible. And it also felt the way that it feels to me right now teaching online. I miss the buzz of people. I literally miss people's bodies. I miss being around people and bumping into them and being part of, you know, just a scene. It's really changed. And so getting used to doing this on the computer is fine. And this is lovely. And I'm so grateful for these opportunities to be able to see an exhibit. But I can't wait until everything gets messy and bumping into people again, and having that energy that's part of it. And I don't know that that'll happen. It's just through my whole life, that was part of seeing art, was people and the art, and having those combined senses together. So it left me wanting more, but then I was also really happy to have done it.
Yeah. Nancy, what was your experience like?
I'm an introvert, so I like being alone. And I think, for example, you know, normal times when we have the openings, it's so nice to get to mingle and talk to the artists and see the people. But I always come back to the show later, especially in Utah. I think outside of the receptions, our galleries are usually pretty empty. So I always go back later to see the show and actually take it in and spend some time with it, with the work. And so it was really nice to be able to do that. I mean, often my experience in busy museums or galleries when I travel is I'll put my headphones in and kind of, you know, create a bubble around me so that it's just me and the artwork, and that becomes my experience. So this wasn't too far from what I usually attempt to do. But I really appreciated the intimacy and just the privacy of being able to have a space to yourself, take your time with the work, not feel pressured to you know, glance at the label and maybe catch a little bit of the statement and move on because someone's right next to you trying to see the same work. So I really loved the experience. And again, you know, as an introvert, I really cherish the times when I get to have art all to myself and spend some time with it.
Awesome. Jorge, how was your experience? And also, I'd like to hear if you have any advice for people or guidance for viewers who are going to go see the show in the future, for how they might view it.
Well, everyone should view it how they best can and are able to, and you know, under the certain limitations that are there. But everyone should see it. It's a really good show, and it's a high caliber art in the show, and it's very thoughtfully curated, and there's certainly something there for the whole family. And you know, so if you want to go with your kids, I believe that when you make a reservation, I think you can I don't know, maybe go up with 4 or 5 people. Is that correct?
Yeah, they asked that it be up to 5 people within the same household unit, but I saw it with 2 friends as well. So
yeah, I mean, yeah. So go with your family, go with your, go with your friends, go with your kids. I would have loved to take in my kids, but which actually I was smiling while Nancy was talking because I think I'm kind of more like Nancy. I'm actually an introverted extrovert or an extroverted introvert. I don't know, but basically I feel like I have to be an extrovert, but deep down inside I'm an introvert. And so I would really people are like, no, you're a social butterfly. It's like, no, I'm actually really uncomfortable. But but so anyway, so it felt really nice to not have to socialize and to just spend all the time that I wanted with any work without having to move along or without feeling, like I have to go and say hi to somebody. And that's not to say that I don't love seeing people, and I do look forward to that very much. I just felt like this was a very unique experience that, it's very rare to be able to go into a gallery and experience the place all by yourself. So yeah, my advice is go see it and take a date, take a friend, take someone that you're interested in or someone that you think is smart and they might have some cool ideas, and just share art. That's the beauty of art, right? It's like, what a better way to have conversations. But for me, it felt just really kind of, almost too fancy for me because I'm just so not used to it. I felt like, wow, like I've been given this amazing privilege to see this work all by myself. I feel like what other art critics or movie critics might feel like when they go see a movie by themselves. But it felt very reverent, and it felt, I think there was more of a chance to feel the energy of the work because there was no distractions. By the way, there's another show next to your show. It's also a lovely show of like some more like kind of optical art, kind of abstract art. It's colorful. It's also worth checking out while you're there.
yeah, it is an excellent show next to us. I just got word that we have a question from the audience. So Claire Taylor, you're going to have to unmute and video mute yourself. There you are. Go ahead and ask the audience question.
Okay, we have a question from Jeremy Rosen. He says, I was intrigued by the mix of media in the pieces you each chose and was wondering if you think that these works played up or against the way their medium might relate to myth and memory. For example, we tend to think of photography as objective, of course not true, but photos tend to replace our memory, so we remember the photo, not what really happened. It's a great question. So a question about how media might relate to myth and memory.
If any of you have a response to that, go ahead and hop in. It looks like Hikmet, maybe do you have something?
Yeah, I'm doing those signals. Yeah, Jeremy, no, that's a great question. I think that part of it is that the different medium in the exhibit, I think, affords different ways for people to be able to enter into the exhibit, that there are going to be certainly walking into the space to see Stephanie Dykes' works hanging right there in all of their majestic color, and the way that she works with form, which is stunning, is really draws people in. And then it takes maybe a little while going through the show to see that there are lots of different types of medium. And along with Mary's work, there's another work that is, or 2 works that are done that are also needlecraft by Sarah Morton Taggart that I wanted to do a shout out, just because I think those works were really interesting also. But there's the opportunity to be able to enter in to say, oh, I'm seeing this work that's this embroidery right now, and I'm going to be, oh, thanks for pulling that up. Yeah. To be able to identify to these particular stitches, to the way that they're done. I can then identify to the materials. Oh, look, I can identify to the state where I live and these different landforms. And so I think it's really interesting. And I really liked what Jorge had to say about the photographic series by McFarland. Those ideas also, because photography is always through I almost said through a lens. That would have been horrible to say that. It's always, but I didn't mean a photographic lens. I meant through a lens of perception and a lens of layered meaning and those ghosts that are there. It's never being objective, ever. And so I'll stop talking now. I can keep on going.
I think those are great insights. Nancy, did you have something to share?
Yeah, so talking about photography specifically, there were, and I'm sorry, I don't have it in my notes, but the postcards, those are appropriated images. So that takes a whole different meaning as far as what the medium is doing in the interpretation of myth. Yeah. And I thought those were especially interesting, and I love everything about this concept. But the other piece that I wanted to talk about was, I believe it's Mitchell Lee's painting. Mm-hmm. And that one, I was really fascinated by the way that he plays with the medium. And he actually is using this form of veiling the subject by putting this piece of plastic over it. And in that sense, making us, blurring the image even more and making us really question. And the whole time I wanted to grab the plastic and take it off so I could see the image. But it's such an interesting way of layering these mediums and creating different meanings and talking about myth in that way.
Absolutely. And Mitchell's piece also came with the instruction for installation of putting it in poor lighting. And so,
oh, nice.
So don't, you might think that we did something wrong there, but yeah, I love that it makes it even more obscured to see what's happening with that painting. If anybody else out there has questions, feel free to drop them in. Oh, Claire just said we have another question. So Claire, come back.
Hello again. So we have a question from Louise Fuller. This question's for Nancy. She asks, do you know the titles of the anthologies you mentioned? That's part one of her question. Do you want to go ahead and answer that, and then I'll ask the second part of her question?
Yes, one of the books is XO Orpheus. Is that the name? If you Google new myths, it will come up. It's wonderful. Highly recommend.
Okay, and then this question, thanks Nancy, and this question I think is for everyone. What themes or threads have you seen, either in this show or others, that would position artwork being created right now as being part of this global moment? That is to say, one of unrest, struggle, fear within the pandemic, as well as the racial tensions in the US.
That's a great question. Jorge, I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have some thoughts on that?
Wow, okay. Let me think about it for a second. Within the context of this show, I think if there's, thinking of it from that frame, I think I would probably draw attention again to the Kachina Doll's work, understanding that Native Americans are being deeply affected by COVID-19 and also everything that's going on with our sort of racial revolution. So I think that one would probably, if I had to pick one, it would probably be that one. But since she asked about other shows, I just want to point to a project that I've kind of been supporting them from behind the scenes, and it's called Pain and Possibility. It's another community group project. It's actually being supported by the Salt Lake City Arts Council and by ZAP, and it's organized by Mestizo Institute of Culture and Arts and Sugar Space. But what they did is they funded 6 different art collectives to do projects specifically based on the idea of responding to everything that we're living in this current climate in all of its different forms, and also responding with a sense of like, either healing or rebelling or empowering, or just, any way that the artist choose to. So I would be looking for that online. It's called Pain and Possibility. And I think a lot of these are live performance-based works or sculptures that will be installed in different places around the city. So sorry, I don't mean to detract the attention from this specific project, but since the viewer watched and asked, I would say, please take a look at that. It's a great project.
No, I absolutely invite that. A really important part of the Halophyte Collective is that we are part of our community. And so being able to hear about other things that are happening in our community is really important. So thanks for bringing that up. Hikmet, did you have a response to this question?
I do, in a way that does come back to the original intent of that question, sort of that kernel of it. Nick Pedersen's work, The Dreamtime. When I saw that in the exhibit, I thought, oh, reminiscent of the painter Alexis Rockman. Alexis Rockman is a contemporary painter who does fairly monumental works that have the same sort of color and saturation and ideas of post-apocalyptic, what are our environments like? What are we going to be living like, right? If we're in the Anthropocene, if climate change continues to work to the level that it has been, because it's stunning, the issues that are taking place related to climate change and these sort of radical shifts. The people who are first impacted always are marginalized people, people of color, people of socioeconomic who are in hardship. And so the peoples who we don't hear about, whose entire villages or islands have disappeared because of the climate crisis. And so there are a lot of issues that are going on that also can be tied into what is taking place through the lens of climate change and environmentalism. And so within that particular painting, I would be able to answer that question that way.
Nancy, did you have, we also have another question if you wanted to move on. I don't want to force you into it, something.
Let's get the next question.
Excellent. Claire, let's bring up the next question. She told me that we have a question from Dale Angus, who was the artist who had done the postcard project that we saw earlier.
That's right. So Dale asks, I'm curious about the title of the show. I kept thinking of it as myth and memory, then remembering that it was myth in memory. I'm curious if the panelists or Andrew have any thoughts about how the title changed or conditioned the way that they viewed the show.
Dale, you don't know how many times I typed it incorrectly as I've been typing everything for this show. I keep typing myth and memory. So you're absolutely right. We gave ourselves quite a challenge. But Nancy or Hikmet or Jorge, do you have some thoughts? Jorge, go ahead.
So I also have read the title numerous times. In fact, I reread it again today just to remind me and make sure that I was reading it correctly, because it's very different, right? Myth in memory versus myth and memory. And so actually, if you don't mind pulling up the work, the Ruse, is it Ruse and Bosch by Nora Price?
Oh yeah.
As in the ballet Ruse. First of all, I just have to say that that's probably my favorite work in the show. I don't know this artist. I'd love to learn more about this artist's work, but so, and I was trying to, because we were asked, as panelists to view the show and to think about the show, and to, I knew that you were going to ask us questions about it. So I was really thinking about the work within the context of the title of the show and the theme of the show. And this is a diptych, right? So yeah, so you're showing the details, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I was thinking, okay, how does this piece fit into the show? And first of all, aesthetically, it just grabbed me. I love work that shows the hand, that shows the work, that shows, that there's some detail there in that last slide that you can see. There's some text that's also been typed in, like there you go, right there. There's just a lot of detail and a lot, you can just dive into these works and get lost in them. They're also very fluid, and there's some, elements that, so the piece is called Ruse and Bosch by Nora Price, and she describes it as scenes from the rite of spring, Nijinsky, Diaghilev, and Stravinsky, Frühling Sofer, The Rite of Spring, Pina Bosch, the wonderful choreographer for the Tanz, Wuppertal. And then she talks about transmissions and appropriations of ritual, performance over centuries, decades, theater seasons, and the library cell rack. So I just thought this work, back to the question, it felt to me, I went home and read more about this. I wanted to learn more about how the artist came to put these thoughts together, and I learned that this Diaghilev, who started the Ballet Russe, was this crazy mad genius who was like bringing together new forms of dance and ballet, right? So it's like the costumes and were all works of art. The scenery were all works of art. The music were all works of art. Everything, and it was super revolutionary at the time, and it just changed how people saw ballet and how people told story. Later on we know that like people like Matisse and Braque were designing sets for the Ballet Russe. So anyway, I was thinking about, I think that this piece, The Rite of Spring, has been reinterpreted like something like over 200 times by, so many different, probably more than that, but, like famously more than like 200 times. And I was thinking about what it is to recreate a work of art as time changes, as time evolves, and as ideas change. And how a myth changes as well, right? How like the meaning of a myth evolves and is interpreted differently according to the knowledge and the times and the experiences that we are living today. So I don't know, that might be a really abstract answer and a way for me to reflect this artwork that I love. But to the questioner's point of view, I think that this is, people they're working by their memory, and they're reinterpreting a myth, a work of art which is mythical, and so it just, the myth builds on itself through time, eternal. And so yeah, I think that's how I thought of myth existing in memory. Sorry, that was a long discourse. I apologize.
That was great, Jorge. And I'm surprised that you don't know Nora. I'm going to put the two of you in contact because you have a lot in common, and I think you'll really appreciate all that she does in this space.
Thank you. Great work.
Yeah. Hikmet or Nancy, did you have a response to this idea of the theme of the show, myth and memory?
I think I missed the memo where you were changing out the word in or and, because I always read it as and myth and memory to me, again, was evocative of Simon Jama's book, Landscape and Memory. And it just was like a whole cohesive theme in my head. It all worked out. Can I take a second because it was Dale who asked the question, can I do a shout out? Because I thought his photographs, I thought that piece conceptually was brilliant. This juxtaposition, and to me it felt like it was all about, and Dale certainly let me know if you want to have a conversation about this, but the idea of the throwaway nature of everything, with that juxtaposition of dating advice for men, right? It's that throwaway nature of dating advice. These are stock photographs, we throw them away. It's the nature of our environment, we've thrown that away, certainly. And then to have these stacks of cards that people can take and then potentially throw away, I thought the whole thing was just really kind of brilliant, with a lot of different layers of meaning that were part of it. And to me, it was myth and memory. So there you go.
Nancy, did you want to chime in, or should we've got one more question from the audience, but
I don't necessarily have an answer to that specific question, but I was thinking about earlier, I think you asked a question of, works that have connections. And as we're talking and going through the works in the exhibition, I keep coming back to, and I guess it relates to the theme as well, but for example, Ron Ross's work. And I was really interested, her work is always so detailed that you have to really spend some time going through it and really accessing it and looking at all the different elements that build it. And it was interesting to me the way that she took something that we're experiencing right now, and that became the myth. On top of that, I think it also mirrored my own experience as an artist, and kind of that balance between wanting to be in the moment, be aware, perhaps create work that's speaking of the contemporary events that are happening in the world, but also, this work very much is doing that. But then also the contrast of some other work that, again, mirrors my experience of wanting to disconnect and maybe push everything aside a little bit and kind of immerse myself in either creating or consuming work that pulls me from this reality. And that's something that I really saw in the work of the constructed realities of Jamie Kyle, and these worlds that are created by using appropriated imagery, old photographs, and now, we have this whole new landscape that it really draws you in. You want to be in there and kind of experience this wild world that she creates with all of these different elements. And I think that was just an interesting way for me to experience this exhibition, and seeing the contrast between the interpretations of the theme and what memory can mean to different people, especially with, Jamie Kyle's use of the old photographs, which in themselves are memories. So that was a connection to the theme.
Yeah, and those photographs were taken by her grandfather as well, and so it brings back the original idea that sprung forth this show of family memory. Claire, do you have our last question from the audience?
Actually, our last question got answered, but I have a question.
Oh, no, you're the audience.
Okay, me as the audience. So I know Hikmet, Nancy, and Jorge, we all asked you here to sort of, represent yourself as your position in the local arts community, within arts organizations like the UMFA, the Utah Division of Arts and Museums, Westminster art historian. But I have a question for you guys as artists and writers, because I know that you are all well-developed artists and writers, and this exhibit was, sort of an open call. And so I'm curious, if you guys were to have submitted a piece to this exhibit, how would you have approached it?
That's a great question.
And if it's too on the spot, that's okay. I'm just curious. Thanks.
Actually, one thing that I love was reading Jorge's bio is that it just seems to me like it's so wrapped up in this. I'm going to answer for you, Jorge. I'm just going to talk about your work and how I've experienced your work, because one of my favorite art experiences in my life was when you and I were in LA together, and you did a tortilla reading for me. And I think it was pretty early in the times of you doing these tortilla readings, and it was so special to me. It's something that I continue to carry in my memory, and that feels like a mythical experience. But but Jorge, do you have an answer to this question about what you would have contributed to the show?
I think I just would have read tortillas for the show, if there was an opportunity to do so. But no, thanks, Andrew. I'm being playful, but my work does deal a lot with spiritual histories and different ways of experiencing sort of traditional mystical practices and connections to the sacred in different cultures. And so, yeah, the Tortilla Oracle is all about that, is about thinking about maize as this sacred food that is connected to our ancestors, and without which we would have not subsisted, right? Both in the Americas, Native Americans, Aztec, Mayan. In fact, the Mayan talk about corn as, in their Popol Vuh, in the Mayan Bible, they talk about how they are from corn. They're people of corn, right? And so that was all an inspiration for that project, which I continue to do, the Tortilla Oracle. And I'm actually, to Claire's point, I am writing about it right now for a coffee table book about art and social practice and food. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, that was one of the first things that came to mind was the myths around spiritual traditions. And I just, I'm constantly challenging what we call myths, because we are actually taught to believe that myths are not true. And actually, we have to be, as museum educators, because I work at the Utah Museum of Fine Arts, we talk a lot about, and as we talk, as we work with our docents and our educators, we want to be very careful never to refer to a culture's traditions as a myth, because it's not a myth for them, it's a myth for us, right? And so it's being aware of, everything from like Santeria and the Orishas and, Voodoo magic or Voodoo religion. And these are all religions that believe in deities and in magic and in, these spirits of our ancestors that are with us all the time. And I just, I love thinking of the world that way, that, with like the Hindu deities and, you name it, almost every culture has them. I think that that's something that actually we lack a lot in our society as a culture here in the United States, as the American culture, though certainly the, Native Americans are very connected to the earth and to the spirits. And so I think, I would be thinking about all of those things if I knew about this call and submitted something for it. I would be thinking about all of those, all of the wonderful living myths that are very much alive. Myths are living, and they have energy. They carry mana and they carry power.
Yeah, thanks so much, Hikmet. Do you what would you have thrown into the ring?
So when was the call?
We put it out in January. It was January through February.
Okay, because I have to do sort of a reframing of this year. If I were going to do something and it was January, I mean, it would certainly be very different than something that I would do now. So for me, the idea of myth and mythology, if I was going to go back to reference my photography, that's sort of the whole idea of what I'm doing. I'm photographing a landscape, except that it doesn't look like it because it's only a tiny little wee fraction of it. And then I work with a printer who has full license to color it however they want to. Mm-hmm. And so every single photograph of mine is a myth. It's a fake of a landscape. And so that's very, kind of innocent and lovely from January. And now I would just do something that would be really different.
Yeah.
Get some of that rage out.
Nancy, how about you?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this. So part of my practice is taking ideas, objects, things that we perceive as natural or authentic, and deconstructing it to be viewed through, thinking about its authenticity, I suppose, and the artificiality behind something, or how it can be viewed as artificial. And that's been my work for a long time. But then recently, I think one of the reasons that Mary's work really resonated with me is for the past year and a half, I've been working on needlework and relating that to my family, again, as I mentioned earlier. And to me, those are sort of these narratives and myths that I want to carry with me and preserve. And seeing her work on this piece and seeing the finished work was really something that I really wanted to connect to, because I understand, one, the work that goes into it, and how you're trying to tell a story through all of these like stitches. Mm-hmm. So the work that I'm working on right now is creating cross-stitch portraits of myself and my family, using images from our passports that we used when we immigrated to the United States, and kind of tracing our path to US citizenship. And that in itself, kind of questioning what is home, how is home defined, and what are the labels that I put on myself, or explore through this, telling of this story of immigration. I think those can all be thought of as myths and storytelling. So I have a lot of different ways that I would have been able to interpret this theme. And I think lately, because of, again, like Hikmet was saying, thinking about myself in January is so different from like now. And like right now, I really want to create work that's personal and that's really telling a story about my experiences versus taking somebody else's work and translating it into a contemporary idea. So yeah, there's many different ways.
Awesome. Well, I will make sure that our next call for entries gets to each one of you individually, because I'd love to see all of these works or whatever else comes up. Well, we've reached beyond our hour, and I really appreciate all of you. I don't know if any of you have any final words to say before I do the old closing remarks.
I do. I just want to say thank you, Andrew, for inviting me, and I want to thank Salt Lake City Arts Council for all the amazing work that they do in supporting the arts. And I want to thank Claire, because she's awesome, and she's like the Wizard of Oz right now behind the scenes and helping. Oh, and Sam. Sam is from the Salt Lake Arts Council. He's also the Wizard of Oz. And also just, it's an honor to be in any vicinity, even virtually, with Hikmet and with Nancy. And Andrew, you bring this very peaceful thing with you, so you should just do this all the time.
Oh, thanks. It's mostly the hair, I think, but thank you.
There's a whole good aura there. I mean, I really reiterate everything that Jorge said. It was an honor. It was great. I've worked, Andrew, we've known each other for quite a long time, and Jorge and Nancy, it was really nice to have the opportunity to hear you and get to know you a little bit, and Claire and Sam.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Okay.
Right.
Thank you so much. But really, Salt Lake City Arts Council, it's really important during this time to have these opportunities. Remember that art is there. Art is vital. People come first. Art is something then that can fill us up and be our communication. And it's really great to be a part of this dialogue. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for including us, and everyone that tuned in. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Congratulations to all the artists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to get the final word. So I just want to thank our panelists, Hikmet, Sidney, Lowe, Nancy, Rivera, and Jorge Rojas, for giving generously of your time and perspectives tonight. Also, I'd like to thank Claire Taylor from the Halophyte Collective for leading the effort to bring this event to life, and Emmeline Twitchell, my partner in coordinating and curating this exhibition. Thank you as well to the Salt Lake Arts Council for hosting the Myth and Memory exhibition and tonight's panel discussion, especially recognizing the efforts of Sarah Hoban, Samantha Smith, Kelsey Ellis, and Felicia Baca for making the Salt Lake City Arts Council and Finchland Gallery an open and dynamic place for visual art in Salt Lake City. A recording of this discussion is going to be available on the Arts Council's website, so you can send everybody who missed it there. And I think it's also going to exist on our Facebook pages. Please visit halophytecollective.com to learn about and purchase our publications and artist books. For more information about the Myth and Memory exhibition, including the virtual gallery that I've been sharing today, and a link to schedule your socially distanced viewing of the exhibition, and just to keep up with anything that the Halophyte Collective has coming up. I'd just like to say Black Lives Matter. Good night.